"Your children aren't my blood," I said, and the words came out harder than I meant them. The boy standing in the doorway didn't flinch. He just looked up at me with those solemn gray eyes, the kind of eyes that had already seen too much of the world, and he whispered, "But you're my pa now." The wind pushed through the open door behind him and rattled the tin cup on the table. Somewhere out past the corral, a mourning dove called once and then went quiet, as if even the birds were waiting to see what a man like me would say to a boy like that. Bitterroot Crossing, Montana Territory, the autumn of 1879. The Yellowstone had started to freeze along its shallows, and the cottonwoods had shed their leaves in a single hard night of frost. My name was Elias Ward, 38 years old, a cattleman with 200 acres of good grass and a heart I had bricked up so thoroughly that I had almost forgotten there was anything living behind the wall. And now, standing in my kitchen, was a widow I had never asked for and 3 children whose father I had buried the week before with my own 2 hands. What none of us knew that afternoon, not me, not the woman quietly unpacking her trunk in the back room, not the boy who had just claimed me as his pa, was that the man in the ground down by the creek had left behind more than 3 children and a debt. He had left behind a secret, and that secret had ridden 11 years across 3 territories to find its way to my door. I set my coffee cup down slow and looked at the boy. He couldn't have been more than 7. His hair was the color of wet straw and his shirt had been mended so many times the patches had patches. He was holding a wooden horse in one hand, whittled crude but with love in every cut. "What's your name, son?" I asked, though I already knew it. His mother had told me twice. "Samuel," he said, "but Ma calls me Sam. And Pa, my other pa, he called me Sammy." "Sam then," I said. I couldn't bring myself to call him Sammy. That name belonged to a dead man, and I was not in the habit of stealing from the dead. He nodded once, very serious, the way old men nod. Then he set the wooden horse on the corner of my table like he was staking a claim, and he walked back out to the yard where his sisters were sitting on the porch step, waiting. I stood alone in the kitchen a long time after that, listening to the woman in the back room fold linens I did not recognize into a chest of drawers I had not offered her. Her name was Ruth Calloway. She had come off the eastbound stage 6 days earlier with 3 children, 1 trunk, and a folded piece of paper that turned out to be a marriage certificate signed by a man named Josiah Calloway. A man who had worked for me on and off for 2 summers, and who had told me exactly nothing about a wife or children back in Missouri. Josiah had been thrown from a Greenbroke horse the morning before Ruth arrived. He lived just long enough to look up at me from the dust and say, "Elias, there's a woman coming. Take care of them. Promise me." And then, because a man's word on the frontier is the only currency that holds its value, I had promised. I had not known what I was promising. I stepped out onto the porch and watched the 3 of them for a moment. Sam sat on the top step, his wooden horse in his lap. The older girl, Hattie, was maybe 10, thin as a rail, with her mother's dark braid and a wariness that made her look twice her age. The little one, Pearl, couldn't have been more than 4. She was sucking her thumb and staring at a barn cat that was staring right back at her with equal suspicion. Ruth came out behind me, wiping her hands on her apron. She was younger than I had expected, perhaps 28, 29, with the kind of face that had once been pretty and was now simply tired. Her eyes, when she raised them to mine, were the color of river stones after rain. "Mr. Ward," she said. Her voice was quiet, but there was iron underneath it. "I don't want your pity. I don't want your charity. I want to know what my husband owed you, and I want to know how I can work it off. The children and I will not be a burden." I removed my hat. I did not know then that I would do this every time I spoke to her for the rest of my life. I just knew, in that moment, that a woman who had crossed half a continent with 3 small children and a dead husband deserved to be spoken to with her head uncovered. "Ma'am," I said, "your husband didn't owe me a thing. He was a good hand. I owe him a wage he never collected and a promise I aim to keep. You'll stay in the guest room. The children can have the loft. As for work, the good Lord willing, we'll figure that out come morning." She studied me for a long moment. I had the distinct feeling of being weighed on a scale I could not see. "Why?" she said at last. "Because I gave my word. To a dead man. A man's word doesn't die when he does, Mrs. Calloway. If it did, it wasn't worth much to begin with. She looked away then, out toward the west pasture where the cattle were drifting toward the water, and I saw her jaw tighten in the way a person's jaw tightens when they are refusing, absolutely refusing, to cry in front of a stranger. On the frontier, kindness was rarer than rain, and worth more. A man who spent his kindness carelessly went broke. A man who hoarded it died alone. The trick, I was slowly learning, was to spend it on the ones who did not ask. That first night, I slept out in the bunkhouse and left the main cabin to Ruth and the children. I lay awake a long time listening to the wind come down off the Ozarkas and thinking about Josiah Calloway. I had known him as a quiet man, a good rider, a Sunday churchgoer who never touched whiskey. I had not known him as a husband or a father. That felt, to me, like a serious oversight, the kind of oversight that a careful man does not make about the people who ride for him. I had trusted Josiah with my horses and my herd, and I had not thought to ask him whether there was anyone in the world who was waiting for him to come home. I resolved, lying there in the dark, that I would not make the same mistake with the woman and children he had left behind. I would learn their names. I would learn what they were afraid of. I would learn what made them laugh if any of them still remembered how. It was 3 days before Hattie spoke to me directly. 3 days of her watching me over the rim of her tin cup at breakfast, of her steering Pearl away from me in the yard, of her standing between me and her mother whenever I came near the kitchen. She had appointed herself the guardian of what remained of her family, and she was not going to be relieved of her post easily. On the morning of the 4th day, I found her out by the woodpile trying to swing an axe that was nearly as tall as she was. She was crying quietly and furiously, and she was determined to split a piece of pine that was never going to split for a 10-year-old girl in a wool dress. I did not take the axe from her. I sat down on the chopping block beside her, took off my hat, and waited. After a long time she said, without looking at me, "Ma cried last night. She thinks I didn't hear. I expect she did. She never cried when Pa was alive. Not once. Not even when Pearl was sick and we didn't have the money for the doctor." I turned my hat slowly in my hands. Sometimes, I said, a person holds it in for so long that when it finally comes out, it comes out all at once, and there's a lifetime's worth of it. That's not weakness, Hattie. That's a body finally being allowed to grieve. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw in that look that she had been carrying her mother, and her siblings, and her whole small world on her thin shoulders for longer than any child should ever have to. "Are you going to send us away?" she asked. "No, ma'am. Are you going to marry Ma?" The question hit me square in the chest, and I did not have a ready answer for it. "That's not a thing I've thought on," I said, which was the truth. "And I'd not think on it lightly. Your mother has been through enough without a man deciding her future for her at a woodpile." She almost smiled then. Almost. She handed me the axe, straightened her braid, and walked back toward the cabin with her chin higher than it had been in 4 days. That night, at supper, Sam pulled his stool right up next to mine at the table. He did not ask permission. He simply moved his plate and his tin cup and his little wooden horse, and he sat where a son sits when he means it. Ruth glanced at him, then at me, and I saw something pass across her face that was not quite alarm and not quite hope. Something raw and half-remembered, like a woman who has forgotten what hope feels like and is not sure she should let it back in. I let the boy sit, and I passed him the biscuits. The first hard weather came the 2nd week of October. A norther swept down out of Canada and dropped the temperature 40 degrees between sundown and midnight. I was out with the herd, pushing them toward the south draw where the wind broke against the ridge, when I heard the crack of a rifle from the direction of the cabin. It was a signal shot. 3, evenly spaced. Ruth had learned the code from me on her 2nd day. I rode back at a hard gallop, the wind cutting through my duster, and by the time I reached the yard the snow had started, small hard flakes coming sideways. Ruth was standing on the porch with the Winchester still in her hands. Her face was white. "Pearl," she said, "she's burning up. She started coughing at noon and now she can't catch her breath." I did not stop to unsaddle. I turned my horse and rode 14 miles into Bitterroot, crossing through the first true blizzard of the season, and I brought Dr. Halloran back behind me on a borrowed mule with a bag full of things I did not understand and a bottle of something that smelled of camphor. It was near midnight when we reached the cabin. Pearl's lips had gone blue. "I have been in war." I have been shot at 3 times and hit once. I have watched a man die of a snakebite because we could not get him to town in time. I tell you truly, I have never known fear the way I knew it that night. Watching a 4-year-old child I had known for 2 weeks fight for each small breath in the lamplight of my kitchen. Ruth did not leave Pearl's side. She sat on the floor beside the trundle bed and she held the child's small hand in both of hers, and she prayed. Not out loud, but I could see her lips moving, and I knew the shape of the words. Sam sat on the far side of the bed with his wooden horse in his lap, and every time Pearl coughed he flinched as if he had been struck. Hattie boiled water on the stove without being asked over and over, so that Dr. Halloran always had steam and clean cloths. Around 3 in the morning the fever broke. Pearl let out a long, shuddering breath, and then a smaller, easier one, and then she slept. Dr. Halloran packed his bag, refused payment, drank 2 cups of coffee, and rode back out into the snow. Ruth stayed on the floor beside the bed. She had not moved for 6 hours. When I brought her a blanket and draped it around her shoulders, she caught my hand. Not held it, just caught it, the way a drowning person catches a rope, and she pressed her forehead against the back of my knuckles and she wept without making a sound. I knelt down beside her. I did not say anything. There was nothing to say. I just stayed there on the floor of my own kitchen, with a woman I barely knew weeping against my hand, and I understood, with a clarity that startled me, that the wall I had built around my heart 11 years ago had a crack in it now, and the crack was widening, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. A man can spend his whole life protecting himself from the very thing that would save him. I had done it. I had been good at it. And in one night, in the space of one child's small breath, I had lost the knack of it entirely. I need to tell you now about the wall because without the wall none of the rest of this makes sense. 11 years before Ruth Calloway ever stepped off that stagecoach, I had been a different man. Younger, softer. I had been engaged to a woman named Cora Bishop in a little town in Kansas called Fair Prospect, and I had loved her with the whole undivided attention of a 27-year-old heart. We were to be married in the spring of '68. I had built a small house with my own hands on a quarter section outside town, and I had painted the kitchen yellow because Cora had once said that yellow kitchens made her feel like the sun was always coming up. Cora died of typhoid 3 weeks before the wedding. She was buried in the dress her mother had sewn for the ceremony, because there was no time and no money to make another. I sold the house without ever sleeping in it. I sold my father's land. I rode west with what would fit in a saddlebag, and I did not speak Cora's name aloud to another living soul for 11 years. That was the wall. That was the brickwork. I had told myself, riding out of Kansas, that a man who had loved once that hard and lost had used up his ration for a lifetime. I had believed it. I had built my ranch and my herd and my quiet, orderly bachelor's life on the foundation of that belief. And now, in the space of 2 weeks, a woman I had not chosen and 3 children I had not asked for were pulling the bricks out of that wall one by one, and they did not even know they were doing it. The morning after Pearl's fever broke, I found Ruth in the kitchen making biscuits. Pearl was asleep in the front room, wrapped in 3 blankets, her color returning. Hattie was mending a shirt of Sam's by the window. Sam was outside, in a coat that was too big for him. One of mine, which he had found on a peg and put on without asking, trying to teach the barn cat to shake hands. Ruth looked up when I came in. Her eyes were red-rimmed but steady. "Mr. Ward," she said, "I owe you a debt I cannot repay. You owe me nothing. I owe you my daughter's life. You owe Dr. Halloran and the good Lord. I only rode the horse." She almost smiled. It was the first time I had seen her come close to one. "You rode the horse 14 miles in a blizzard, sir. Let me at least call that what it is." I took off my hat. I turned it in my hands. And then, because I had spent the small hours of the morning thinking about Cora Bishop and yellow kitchens and 11 years of silence, I said something I had not planned to say. "Mrs. Calloway, Ruth, I don't know what your husband told you about me, and I don't know what you were promised when you got on that stagecoach in Missouri. But I want you to know, the offer of this house and my protection, and a place for those children to grow up, it does not come with any conditions. Not one. Whether you stay a month or the rest of your natural life, whether you ever look at me as more than the man who buried your husband or not, that door, I nodded toward the front of the cabin. Swings both ways for you, freely always. Do you understand me? She was quiet for a long time. She looked down at her flour-dusted hands. Then she looked up. I understand you, Mr. Ward. And I thank you. But I would like, if it is all the same to you, to be called Ruth from now on. Only my mother-in-law ever called me Mrs. Calloway, and she did not care for me. Ruth, then, I said. And I'm Elias. I know, she said. Sam has been telling the cat. The winter set in earnest by the end of October. The snow piled up against the north side of the barn until it reached the eaves. The creek froze solid enough to walk cattle across. And in the long, close, lamplit evenings of that season, something happened in my cabin that I had not planned for and could not have prevented if I had tried. We became a family. Not by any word spoken, not by any ceremony, not by any decision announced at the supper table. It happened the way ice forms on a still pond, slowly, layer by layer, and then one morning you wake up and it will bear your weight. Sam took to following me everywhere. He wanted to know how to check a hoof for stone, how to read the sky for weather, how to tell a heifer from a steer at 50 paces. He asked questions from sunup to sundown, and he listened to the answers with a gravity that broke my heart a little every time. He was starved for a father. He had lost one, and before I had understood what was happening, he had chosen me for the next. I did not stop him. I could not have stopped him. I taught him what I knew. I taught him to whittle a better horse than the one he carried, and he gave me the new one on Thanksgiving morning without a word. Just set it on my plate the way he had once set his first horse on my kitchen table, staking a claim. Hattie took longer. Hattie had loved her father fiercely, and she was not about to let another man slip into the space he had left. But she watched me. She watched how I spoke to her mother and how I spoke about her father, always with respect, always as your pa, never a word of criticism. And by Christmas she had begun to hand me my coffee in the mornings without being asked, which for Hattie was a declaration. Pearl, once she was well, adopted me the way a kitten adopts a doorstep. She simply climbed into my lap one evening while I was reading by the fire, arranged herself against my chest, and fell asleep. Ruth looked over from her mending and did not say a word, but her eyes when they met mine held something I did not know how to name. And Ruth herself. Ruth, who had crossed a continent with a dead husband and 3 living children, and had not let herself cry until the night her youngest almost died in my kitchen. Ruth was the slowest and the surest of all. She began, in small ways, to bring the cabin to life. She hung dried herbs from the beams. She sewed curtains for the kitchen window out of a bolt of blue calico she had brought in her trunk. She sang to Pearl at bedtime, old songs I half remembered from my own mother, and I would stand outside the bedroom door pretending to check the lamp wick just so I could hear her voice a moment longer. One evening in early December, I came in from the barn stamping snow off my boots and found her standing in the middle of the kitchen with a letter in her hand. Her face was the color of ash. Elias, she said. Her voice was very small. There's a man coming. It is a strange thing about the past. You can ride away from it for 1,000 miles and 11 years, and it will still find you on a Tuesday, in a snowstorm, with a letter in a stranger's handwriting. The letter had been carried by a peddler from Miles City. It was addressed to Mrs. Josiah Calloway, and it was signed by a man named Cyrus Draper. I did not know the name. Ruth did, and when she said it, her hand trembled so badly the paper rattled. Cyrus Draper, she told me, was her first husband's brother. Josiah Calloway had not been the father of Hattie or Sam or Pearl. Josiah had been the second husband, the good one, the kind one, the one who had married a young widow with 3 small children in a hard year in Missouri, and who had promised to raise them as his own and had done exactly that until a Greenbroke horse had thrown him in a corral in Montana Territory. The children's real father had been a man named Thaddeus Draper. And Thaddeus had died, Ruth had believed, in the war. She had been widowed at 22 with a 2-year-old girl, a baby boy, and another child on the way. She had married Josiah out of desperation and had grown, over the 7 years that followed, to love him truly. The children had been told, gently and truthfully, that Josiah was not their blood father but was their pa in every way that mattered. What Ruth had not known, what nobody had known, was that Thaddeus Draper had not died at Shiloh. He had deserted. He had gone west under a different name. He had been shot to death in a saloon in Deadwood in the summer of '78, and he had left behind, in the safe of a lawyer in Miles City, a will. Cyrus Draper's letter informed Ruth that Thaddeus's will bequeathed his estate, a considerable estate, made from a silver claim he had held under a false name, to his 3 legitimate children, provided they could be produced and their identity verified within 1 year of his death. That year was up in 6 weeks. Cyrus Draper was, the letter stated, on his way from Miles City to escort his brother's children and their mother to the lawyer's office to claim what was rightfully theirs. He would arrive, weather permitting, before the new year. Ruth sat down at my kitchen table and she put her face in her hands, and she did not weep. She had spent all her weeping already. She simply sat. "I don't want it," she said at last. "I don't want a penny of that man's money. He left me. He left 3 children who did not know his face. Josiah was their father. Josiah paid for their shoes and taught Sam to whittle and sat up all night with Hattie when she had the croup. Josiah is in the ground down by the creek. I don't want Thaddeus Draper's silver." "Then don't take it." She looked up at me. "You don't understand, Elias. Cyrus Draper is not a man who takes no for an answer. When Thaddeus disappeared, Cyrus tried to marry me. His own brother's wife, or so he thought, before the year of mourning was out. He was refused. He did not take it well. When I married Josiah, he sent a letter saying he would remember it. He has remembered it for 7 years. He can remember all he likes. He's not taking those children anywhere. He has the law. If he has a copy of the will and he can prove Hattie and Sam and Pearl are Thaddeus's children, and he can, Elias, there are records, then he can petition the court to be their guardian. A widow with no property has no standing. He can take them from me. He can take them, and he can raise them as Drapers, and there is not a judge in this territory who will side with a penniless mother against a wealthy uncle with a legitimate claim. I stood at the window a long time. The snow was coming down hard again, and the light was going, and out in the yard I could see Sam trying to teach Pearl how to make a snow angel. "He will not take them," I said. My voice did not sound like my own. "Not while I draw breath. Do you hear me, Ruth? He will not take them. Elias, there's one thing gives a mother standing in court against a rich uncle. There's exactly one thing, and that's a husband with a name and a ranch and a rifle." She stared at me. "I am not asking you out of love," I said, which was not true, but I did not know yet that I had begun to love her, and I did not want her to feel that a proposal made in a crisis was any kind of bargain. "I am asking you because I gave my word to Josiah Calloway, and because those 3 children are asleep upstairs and one of them calls me Pa, and because I will be damned before I let a man like Cyrus Draper walk into this house and take them for money that was stained before it was ever earned. Marry me, Ruth. Not for love. Not yet. Marry me for standing. Marry me for the children. Marry me because I am asking." She did not answer for a very long time. Then she said very quietly, "Elias, take off your hat." I had forgotten I was wearing it. I removed it. "Now ask me again. Not for standing. Ask me the way a man asks a woman when he means it. I will not be married on a technicality, Elias Ward. If I marry you, I marry you. And if you cannot ask me that way, then we will find another road." I turned my hat in my hands. 11 years is a long time to be silent. 11 years is a long time to keep a wall standing. I thought of Cora Bishop, and I thought of the yellow kitchen I had never slept in, and I understood, standing there in the lamplight with a widow who had crossed a continent and a snowstorm gathering at the windows, that Cora would have liked this woman. Cora would have liked her very much. "Ruth Calloway," I said, "I have known you 8 weeks. I did not expect you. I did not ask for you. I did not know, when I gave my word to your husband, that I was giving my word to you and to your children as well. But I gave it, and it holds. And in these 8 weeks I have watched you carry more than any woman should ever be asked to carry. And I have watched you do it with a straight back and a steady hand. I have not loved a woman in 11 years. I did not know I still could. I know now. Marry me, Ruth. Because I love you. Because I love those children. Because this house has been dark for 11 years and it is not dark anymore, and I do not want to go back to how it was." She was crying. Not sobbing. Just tears, running down her face without her seeming to notice. "Yes," she said. "Elias. Yes. We were married 3 days later by Reverend Coombs in the front room of the cabin. Hattie held her mother's hand. Sam held mine. Pearl sat on the horsehide rug and played with a length of blue ribbon Ruth had taken from her own hair. The Reverend rode back to town before the next storm hit, and that night I slept in my own bed for the first time in 3 weeks, with my wife beside me and 3 children in the loft above us, and the wind coming down off the mountains, and the whole quiet weight of a life I had never expected settling gently onto my shoulders. Cyrus Draper arrived on the 2nd day of January. He came in a black wool coat with a fur collar, on a fine bay horse, with 2 men riding behind him who did not have the look of family. He rode up to the front of my cabin at 11 in the morning, and he did not dismount. He sat his horse and he waited for me to come out to him, the way a man waits when he believes himself to be the master of the meeting. I came out. I did not hurry. I had my Winchester in the crook of my arm, not raised, not lowered, simply present, the way a man carries a tool he knows how to use. "Mr. Ward," Cyrus Draper said. He had a thin face and pale eyes, and he smiled with only the lower half of his mouth. "I am here for my brother's children. I have papers. I have the law. I would prefer this to be a civilized matter." "So would I, sir," I said. "Which is why I would ask you to step down off that horse and come inside, where my wife has coffee on, and we will discuss the matter as men." He blinked. "Your wife?" "My wife. Ruth Ward. Formerly Calloway. Formerly, some years back, Draper. Married to me in this house on the 18th of December by Reverend Coombs of Bitterroot Crossing, witnessed by Dr. Halloran and by Mrs. Halloran, entered into the county book on the 20th. The children upstairs are her children, sir, and by the laws of this territory they are also, as of that date, my stepchildren, and I am their legal guardian in the absence of any other." Cyrus Draper's smile faded. The lower half of his mouth went flat. "The will," he said, "names the children, does not name a guardian. The mother stands. And the mother, sir, is married to me. You did this on purpose." "I did it on purpose." There was a silence then. The 2 men behind him shifted in their saddles. One of them let his hand drift toward his coat. I did not raise the Winchester. I did not need to. I had spent 11 years learning to stand very still, and I stood very still now. "Mr. Draper," I said, "you are welcome to come inside and take coffee with my wife and me, and we will speak of your brother's will, and of what the children are owed, and of how that money, which I understand to be considerable, might be held in trust for them until they come of age. My wife has told me she does not want a penny of it for herself. But those children are owed their inheritance, and they will have it, and it will be administered honestly, and it will be waiting for them when they are grown. That is my offer, sir. It is a fair one. I would take it." He looked at me a long time. He looked at the Winchester. He looked at the cabin, at the smoke rising from the chimney, at the small movement of a curtain in the kitchen window where I knew Ruth was standing. "And if I refuse? Then you will ride back to Miles City, sir, and you will file whatever paper you wish to file, and I will meet you in whatever court you wish to meet me in, and I will spend every dollar of my herd, if I must, to keep those 3 children under this roof. But you will not take them today. You will not take them ever. I have given my word." To whom? To their mother. To a dead man. And to a boy who called me Pa before he had any right to. Cyrus Draper sat his horse a moment longer. Then slowly he dismounted. He handed his reins to one of his men. He removed his hat, which surprised me and which I noted, and he walked past me toward my cabin door. "I will take that coffee, Mr. Ward," he said, "and we will talk." We talked for 4 hours. In the end, a trust was drawn up in Miles City in the presence of the lawyer, with Ruth and myself as co-trustees, and the funds to be released to Hattie, Sam, and Pearl on their respective 21st birthdays. Cyrus Draper signed. He did not smile when he signed, but he shook my hand, and he shook Ruth's, and he tipped his hat to Hattie in the doorway. Before he left, he stopped on the porch and turned back to me. "Mr. Ward, my brother was not a good man. I have spent 7 years trying to make what he did right. I did not always go about it in the wisest way. You have done in 8 weeks what I could not do in 7 years. I will not forget it." He rode out. I never saw him again. He sent a Christmas letter every year until he died in 91, and each letter contained a small carved wooden animal for each of the children, whittled by his own hand. Sam kept them all. Sam keeps them still. Spring came late that year. It always does in Montana. But when it came all at once. The creek ran full, the cottonwoods leafed out overnight. The calves dropped one after another in the south pasture. Ruth planted a kitchen garden. Hattie learned to ride astride. Sam grew 2 inches. Pearl learned to whistle. On a warm evening in May, I stood on the porch of my cabin with my wife beside me and watched the 3 children chase fireflies across the yard in the last blue light of the day. Sam was 7.5 now. He still carried his wooden horse in his pocket. He still called me Pa. Ruth slipped her hand into mine. Elias, she said, do you remember what you said to Sam that first day? About his not being your blood? I remember. He remembers too. He told me last week. Did he? He told me, her voice caught for a moment. He told me he understood, even then, that blood wasn't the point. That you were the man who stayed. He said he knew, standing in that doorway, that you would stay. I did not say anything for a while. There is a kind of feeling that does not have words for it, and the frontier is full of it, and any man who has lived out here long enough learns to let it pass through him without trying to name it. Finally I said, he was right. I did stay. I mean to keep on staying. Sam looked up from the yard just then, as if he had heard his name. He came running across the grass with a jar in his hand and a firefly inside it, and he held it up to me, glowing green gold in the dusk. Pa, he said, look what I caught. I knelt down. I took off my hat. I looked at the small living light inside the jar, and at the small living boy holding it, and I said the only thing there was to say. That's a fine catch, son. That is a mighty fine catch. On the frontier, a man learns quickly which things are his by right and which things are his by grace. The land is by right. The weather is by right. The long hard work is by right. But the people, the ones who come to your door in a storm, the ones who choose you when they did not have to, the ones who whisper Pa before you have earned the word, those are by grace. And grace, once given, is not a thing a decent man refuses. Grace is a thing he spends the rest of his life trying to deserve. I said once that his children were not my blood. I was not wrong. They were not. They were something better. They were mine because they chose to be, and I was theirs because I chose to be, and no piece of paper and no bloodline and no lawyer in Miles City could make it more true than it already was on the evening a 7-year-old boy stood in my doorway with a wooden horse in his hand and told me, quietly and with the whole certainty of his small brave heart, that I was his Pa now. And the good Lord willing, I always will be.